We are a nation better than any other, virtually chosen by God. We are the light on the hill, because we, the Americans, are right. Rules are for lesser mortals, for other countries. But if we break rules, we are right, because we are America. People don't question whether the alliance with America is a good thing or not. They now take it for granted. We are not another state of the American Union. I'd felt for quite some time that Australia was becoming too closely tied to the United States in all sorts of ways. After the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union disintegrated, I thought, now's an excuse. Now we can really become a bit more independent. And I was concerned that over this period we seemed to embark on a number of ventures, all of which took us closer and closer within the American military machine, if you like.
America has more control over Australia today than Britain ever had in the days of empire. Well, people have been taught to believe that if you criticize America, you're anti-American. And, debates are shut down here with that argument.
When I really started to analyze our current relationship with America, I became more concerned, and especially concerned because of troops in Darwin. Now, if America wants to use what will be a very powerful three-service task force to exercise power somewhere in the Western Pacific, they're not going to ring up whoever's Prime Minister of the day and say, look, we want to go and clobber somebody. Do you mind? They're going to do it. The purpose of Pine Gap has changed greatly. In the old days, it was an information collecting operation. Now, changes in weapons technology, changes in communications technology, has turned it over the last 20 years into a much wider and in many ways more important and more deadly facility. How many people here would know or believe, you better believe it because it's true, that when 2 Australians were killed in Yemen, the basic information for that probably came from Pine Gap, and within an hour they were dead. It's used in real-time killings for drone attacks. It's used for targeting other weapon systems. It's used also with other facilities to help target anti-ballistic missile systems.
Australians have not been informed. They've not been asked about any of these developments. We've also not been informed of other changes that have taken place. When Washington takes up a provocative stance against China, when our frigate is part of her escorts, we are part of the action hostile to China. Now we learn, if the Australian is correct, and I have no reason to doubt it, that Australia and the United States are planning to allow the United States to aim and fire missiles from Australian ship platforms. In other words, our ships just serve an American purpose. Now, it is quite wrong to give any other country the power to take us to war. And we've become so close to the United States that if they go to the war in the Pacific, we don't really have an option to stay out of it. An Australian Prime Minister has no capacity to stand up in the Parliament and say, we're going to pass this one by. And I believe that's a total betrayal of Australian sovereignty, of the Australian Parliament and people, and no independent country, no separate country, should put itself in that position.
But let's go back to 9/11 and the war on terror. Had you been in the lodge at that time, would you have done what Howard did? Would you have joined the coalition of the willing?
In 2003?
Yeah.
Never. Because I knew there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I really believe, when you read all the things about American exceptionalism and the policies of neoconservatives, that was their motivation for the war, but they would never get other countries to support that. So they developed the idea of weapons of mass destruction, which was from the beginning a lie.
Just to go back to Iraq, because I know you were very anti. The information was on WMD
fabricated.
Was fabricated. So can you explain what it says about our politicians and about our security service?
Well, it says something about the political class, if you like, which includes politicians, public servants, members of the military, bemused by America, captured by America. And, we followed America into 3, or if you like, 4 wars now, if you take these recent events, and starting with Vietnam. Well, they've all ended really in failure. Well, there was a military victory over Saddam Hussein. Politically and strategically, it's been a total disaster. It's unleashed sectarian rivalries and hatreds in the Middle East, which nobody at the moment knows how to contain. Now, if Saddam Hussein had not been overthrown in that way, that was, in his time, all this was kept under control. Certainly he was a brutal, terrible dictator. They've had a number of allies who've been brutal and terrible dictators, and that hasn't worried them at all, so long as they were serving American purposes. I don't want to follow America into another major war.
It was known out in the public domain that the idea of weapons and mass destruction in Iraq was a fabricated reason to go to war. We all know that now, but a lot of people knew it at the time. I mean, I had letters from people in London saying it's very uncomfortable to think that Saddam Hussein can have weapons of mass destruction, chemical or biological weapons, over London in 45 minutes. Now, Tony Blair could have knocked that on the head immediately, because he knew, we should have known, I knew, the Americans knew, that Saddam Hussein had missiles that could go 300 miles with enormous inaccuracy. And if you looked at a map and put out where they could go, they couldn't threaten any European city, much less London. So the suggestion was a lie.
Now, on false flags, so when did you first discover that the Gulf of Tonkin was a fraudulent thing?
Well, there were allegations at the time, but doing the research for my book really brought this out into the open in a major way. And Senator Fulbright, who guided the War Powers Resolution as a result of the Gulf of Tonkin through the Senate for President Johnson, later accused the President of having misled him.
We were misled, as you would see if any of you read the book, in relation to Vietnam. Misled by President Johnson, and that should not be surprising because Senator Fulbright, who put the Gulf of Tonkin resolution through the Senate, claimed later that he had been misled by President Johnson. If he's going to mislead one of his own senators, don't think he would have too many qualms about misleading a small ally in the southwestern Pacific. He had advice that the war was lost when Harold Holt put 3 battalions. Harold was never told that. If he knew that, he would not have made that commitment. And the government of the day would not have made that commitment. And so following a major power into war when they've already done it 3 times, we don't want to do it a 4th time.
And I was really interested when I heard your interview with John Fain.
Israel, years ago, during one of the wars, killed 30 or 40 Americans on a spy ship in the Western Mediterranean.
That was a mistaken missile hit, if I remember correctly, or an airstrike, I can't remember.
The Americans tried to cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate.
You believe so?
Yes.
That's a massive claim to make.
It is. The United States had decided that if it were proven that quite deliberately Israeli ships and aircraft had attacked USS Liberty, that it would not be possible to sustain the unquestioning support for Israel that America had provided. And Dean Rusk I think Jesse Helms, a number of others, Admiral Maurer, who was a significant person in the American Navy, I think in charge of the Mediterranean Fleet at the time, and others have all said, in spite of the official inquiries saying it, it was all an accident, they don't deny it happened, they say it was an accident, but 34 Americans were killed and over 70 wounded. The senior people I mentioned said no, it was no accident. But it demonstrates that a major power, when it believes its vital interests are involved, will sacrifice any number of its own people to preserve that vital interest. And that says something about the power.